Today's guest is Jennie Johnson, MBE, who's a childcare entrepreneur of the last 20 years.
So I quit a six-figure salary job and I was looking to create something quite special.
Now, with 2 children under the age of 3 and a third on the way.
I have 3 children, so between us, we've done it. And we know that parenting is challenging.
I was particularly interested in what she's doing with her new company, My First 5 Years. It's an app which helps children and parents navigate the modern world of parenting.
Consumer downloads it from the App Store or the Play Store, and they pay a monthly subscription.
They also have a podcast, and honestly, it is one of the best ones that I've ever come across.
Thank you for saying that, Jimmy.
Jennie, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thank you for asking me, Jimmy. I'm excited to be here.
What led to you setting up Kidsaloud?
Really simply, I couldn't find childcare for my own child. So because of that, I tried to make do amend with friends and family. And that didn't work out particularly well. And one day, true story, I nearly missed the train to London because my childcare had fallen through that day, my informal childcare. And when I think I was the last person to board the train to London that day, and I actually thought I might have died from stress. I think if they'd had a heart monitor on me, they might have decided that I had clinically died. And I sat on the train and I thought, this is just ridiculous. I'm trying to work full time. My childcare arrangements are a mess. And that was what was causing the drama in my life. And I sat there within 5 minutes of boarding the train and realised that what would fix my life was high quality childcare. And by the end of the train journey, I'd come up with the name Kidsaloud. I'd listed all the services that I thought an amazing childcare provider should have. I got home that day, registered the name, and quit my job the next day. And honestly, that is what happened.
Amazing.
and set about trying to deliver the dream that was an amazing experience for children.
And what was your job before? What were you doing?
So I was a sales director and, worked full time in IT and really full on job where I had to sort of get to work, focus. It wasn't a 9 to 5 by any means. So you can imagine juggling all the balls that, full time working parents do. It was a challenge, and I knew that the thing that could really, really help me was knowing that my daughter was having an amazing day so that I could focus on my career.
And talk to us, because you scaled it into a pretty big business, like 500 people at its maximum. What was it like working in the childcare sector, going from sales?
Well, the thing is that so when I decided that I was going to leave my job and set up Kidsaloud, it was to do it at scale. So I quit a 6-figure salary job and I was looking to create something quite special. And when I set out at the beginning, it was to open 9 centres throughout the northwest of England. And when I sold the business 18 years later, I'd opened 8, and there was a 9th on the way, but I didn't quite get to open it myself. And you know what? Running a childcare business is not for the faint-hearted at all. It's so many moving parts. You're regulated by Ofsted, and if you know any teachers, they tend not to have much of a good word to say for Ofsted. They're a bit of a law unto their own. So we had really heavy-handed regulators in Ofsted. But then I think what people don't appreciate about running a childcare company is that you're also, in our case, we had 2,000 children attending every week. So we were a 2,000 cover restaurant across 8 sites. Is one way to look at it, preparing fresh food every day for all the different allergies and intolerances that you could think of. So that in itself is complex. And then we also had a fleet of 17 minibuses across all the centres. So we were a licensed taxi firm as well, with all the legislation involved in running a licensed taxi firm. So I honestly can't think of much more of a complicated business to run. And you're looking after people's children, and that is a massive responsibility. So I think it's fair to say I didn't have a good night's sleep for 18 years.
What did you most enjoy about it?
I got a massive buzz from 3 things actually. Walking the floor and seeing children having a fabulous day. So that was the centre of everything. And in fact, our little motto was making children happy. And that was what it was all about, was that we wanted to see, and often did see, kids literally skipping in the place to spend the day there. Chatting to parents is another big high when you listen to the impact that delivering this exceptional service for children has on parents, and the wonderful feedback that we got from almost all the parents. I'm not trying to say that we never had a complaint ever, but we had really happy customers. And then my really big buzz was the 500 plus colleagues that worked for Kidsaloud, and the fact that they too loved working for the company, and that we'd created an environment where people enjoyed coming to work, could flourish, could feel appreciated and valued. And I think the combination of the happy kids, the happy colleagues, the happy parents, for me, I got a massive buzz out of that.
Why is childcare so expensive, though? I mean, it's become, in the last 20 years, now one of the kind of big, hot political topics. And why do you think it has just got so much more expensive?
It really is all about staffing ratios, and they're high, and rightly so. To look after babies, you're on a 1-to-3 ratio, one colleague to look after 3 children. And it's expensive. And interestingly, I'm a Salford girl, and when I set up Kidsaloud, my original motto was affordable childcare for all. And I couldn't deliver it. When I wrote the business plan, it's not possible, because if you want to pay decent wages, so we paid real living wages. If you want to pay decent wages and you do your spreadsheet, the calculations come out at the end that the childcare is going to be expensive. So for me to round the circle, I had to open in what I call pockets of wealth. So Kidsaloud, it was in places like Knutsford and Didsbury, and places where people could afford to pay the higher fees. And that didn't sit well with me as a Salford girl. I couldn't open one of my settings in the area that I grew up in, because the price point for childcare in that area just wouldn't have washed. But for me, I justified that I really looked after the team, and that the team had better wages at Kidsaloud than they'd have had anywhere else in the sector. So that was where I did my good stuff. But childcare is expensive because it's underfunded. The government sort of announces these sort of 30 free hours, but they don't pay the providers enough. So there's a lot of sort of unhappiness between customers' expectations that they can get something for free, providers' expectations that they can't make the maths work unless parents pay extra. Something radically needs to change in the sector. I completely agree.
And what were your sort of reflections on maintaining a happy workforce, and how did you do that? Because it is notorious for having quite high turnover, etc. So how did you look to tackle that?
Yeah, it is notorious for that. And we did really, really well on it. We had really low staff turnover. I never once used agency staff in the entire 18 years I ran the business, which again, if you speak to most group providers, they'll tell you that they're constantly battling low staff numbers. I think there's a number of things that I did. We had slightly more staff than we needed to have for the legislation, which gave everybody a bit of breathing space. We really focused in on listening to colleagues. So I used to do this thing called Lunch with Jennie. And I did it every week. And I invited, say, a dozen colleagues to sit and have lunch with me. And I asked the same 3 questions. And because it's on the spot, I'm trying to remember them. I've not done it for 3 years. So I think one of the questions was, what can we do to make this a better place to work? And the ideas always come from the colleagues. Mm-hmm. What can we do to make this a better place for children and our customers, and customers being the parents as well? And then the third question, which always got a laugh, was, do I ask you to do anything stupid? And what that means is, in a highly regulated space, you've got all these rules that people have to sort of follow to make sure that we're doing everything that we should be doing. But you can sometimes write those rules in an ivory tower and not really understand the impact of them at the coalface. So I used to constantly listen to the colleagues about what we could do to improve their working experience. And then at the end of every one of their meetings, we had like a massive private Facebook group. I'm sure things have moved on since now, but everybody was on it, and we'd say, these things came up in the meeting. This is what we're going to do about it. This is whose idea it was. Thanks very much. So people were getting the credit for the ideas. And sometimes if it was, that was a good idea, but we can't do it, I could go on and say, and this is why. So I think it was all about communication and being really, really clear that we wanted to be an amazing place to work. We wanted to create an environment where people could flourish and be amazing at their job. But we did that by listening and responding. And one of our sort of mantras was getting better every day. And I don't mean those big, massive leaps where, you know, you wake up and you've done this big thing today that's improved the company. It was about every single day just ratcheting it up a little bit, just something that moved the company forward, so that when you look back a year later, it's like, wow, look how far we've come. And when you do that consistently for 18 years, and that you're aspiring for excellence, not perfection, but excellence, and you've created a culture of no fear, where if people make mistakes, they can hold their hands up and say, this happened today, and we can reflect and we can learn and we can share the learning. I just think we created a fabulous culture, and that's how we got the reputation that we got.
And one of those phrases that you used as well, which has kind of stuck with me as well, is excellence, not perfection. And I think that will strike true with a lot of entrepreneurs, that you always kind of want it to be perfect, but realize that most of the time you'll never get anything shipped if you don't. So how did you demonstrate to people excellence?
Well, I do think it's talking the talk and walking the walk yourself. So, excellence in things like the respectfulness that we had to the colleagues, how we spoke with the colleagues, being genuinely grateful, genuinely saying thank you. So one of the things that I used to do is little handwritten notes to colleagues in a card that got posted to the house with a stamp. So people were receiving things that meant something to them, and they'd quite often post on on either their public Instagrams and Facebooks, or the private group that had happened. So people were seeing, I suppose, excellence in their daily lives, but also, having really high standards and holding people to account, and holding myself to account for those high standards as well. But I do think that people really, the right people, if you get the right people in the business, which is what we did, we were really careful about how we recruited, and we recruited for what we called attitude rather than qualifications. So we were looking for the right people, and then we could help them gain their qualifications through our training academy, which is another thing that I did to improve qualifications and quality of colleagues, was to take responsibility for training ourselves. But those high expectations, when you walked in one of our buildings, it looked beautiful, it smelt beautiful, it was clean, the toys and resources were, beautiful as well. And I think it was just that everybody understood that we wanted to be excellent. Everybody kind of bought into what excellence looked like. And then, walking the floor. My manager's job every day was to walk the floor, not sit at your desk. First thing in the morning, they would go and stand at the front door for the first hour and a half at least, and welcome everybody through the door, colleagues, customers, children. And I remember when I introduced that, go and stand at the front door for an hour and a half, they were like, an hour? You just want me to stand there and say hello for an hour and a half? It's like, yes, that's literally what I want you to do. Because you can imagine what that does. It gets dialogue, it gets, customers giving feedback. It's a brilliant way to really get in touch with what's going on, and then to walk the floor.
And you were also talking beforehand, you were sharing a story about going to awards and hotels, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, we were delivering a 5-star service, and some of our colleagues had never experienced a 5-star service themselves. So I remember there's all sectors have awards, don't they? And they're typically in London. So we had 2 or 3 different awards over the course of the year that we would often be shortlisted for, often won. And we'd always take a table of 10, and myself and my co-founder would host 8 of the colleagues. And it was a real privileged to get picked out of the hat. We used to say, who wants to come? They'd put the names in the hat, and we'd literally do a live draw, and there'd be 8 names come out. And we'd go and we'd do it all first class. We'd travel first class on the train. We'd stay in a beautiful hotel. We really, really spoiled them so that they got to experience what 5-star service looks like. And I remember being in the toilet once at one of these awards, and I overheard another owner talking, and she was in the fancy hotel, and the colleagues that she brought were in the crappy hotel down the road, and she was kind of laughing about it. And I just thought it was vile. I thought, why do you think you deserve that and they deserve the other? Either go and stay at the crappy one yourself if you can't afford it, or and all be in it together, or they come with you. And I think when you have a values-driven business and you genuinely have values yourself and you're living and breathing those values, the colleagues recognise it, and they see that, it is different working there than it is working down the road. And we do look after colleagues and create this environment that they want to be there. Does that make sense?
Completely. And I think it's so true. Why your passion comes through it so much. and you obviously awarded an MBE for it as well. How come you decided to sell?
Do you know, if you'd have spoke to me, a week before the decision to sell, I'd have said I was never going to sell. I'd got myself a managing director in place. I was down to 3 days a week. But the issue with childcare for me is that I could never switch off. So, I've already alluded to the fact that I probably have never had a good night's sleep in the 18 years that I ran the company. And I had a run-in with Ofsted, basically. They arrived at one of my sites. I was really unhappy with how we were treated and how they were talking to us. And I all of a sudden realised that everything that I had built was completely vulnerable to somebody walking through the door that had had a bad night's sleep and was in a bad mood and could come and mess with my business. And it completely floored me, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I woke up the next day and I'm like, I'm done. I can't carry on living under this amount of pressure when actually some of that pressure is coming from a source that behaves in an unreasonable way and that there's no talking to and that there's no challenging. And I realised it was going to break me, if that makes sense. And I remember ringing my husband of the time and saying, I'm done. And he's like, what do you mean you're done? And I was like, I'm selling. I'm not doing this anymore. And I think that was on a Wednesday. And by Friday, I'd provisionally put the company on notice to sell the business. And it was the right thing. And as much as the week before, if you'd have asked me, was I going to sell my business? I was like, nope, I'm going to, keep running it in the background. I've got this amazing managing director and it'll all be good. And I'm not going anywhere. I just realized I was done. And I acted upon it rather than what I think a lot of people do when they realise they're done is they carry on and they make themselves ill and they have that professional burnout. And I'm really relieved I did it. And what I didn't realise was the burden I was carrying on my shoulders until I no longer was. So I remember the day after I'd sold the business, waking up and not being responsible for 2,000 children and not being responsible for 500 colleagues and not having the threat of Ofsted and not having the threat of this, that and the other. And just waking up and going, I can breathe.
What did Ofsted do?
They're just all powerful. They can come into your bit. So, for example,
because I think people are quite used to it with teaching and they understand that, but they don't probably get it with nurseries.
Well, they just have all the same powers with nurseries. They have the right to do a no-notice inspection. What you have to realise, at the time that this happened to us, we had all outstanding settings. From a quality point of view, we were independently recognised as being the best childcare provider in the UK. On a list of providers, we were number one. And I guess you kind of feel sometimes your head's above the parapet, you're number one, and you do begin to feel a little bit got at. And they had a complaint that we were what you call out of ratio during lunchtime. Now, what they could have done was come at lunchtime, unannounced, walk the floor, count the kids, count the colleagues, and within half an hour, they'd have known that it wasn't true, that it was, a malicious complaint, because that's, again, it does happen. There's a lot of malicious complaints go on in childcare. So, yeah, they could have been done within half an hour. But instead, they arrived at the door at 7:30 in the morning to do a full inspection in a really grumpy, bad mood, looking for problems. And it was, within 10 minutes of this woman walking through the door, you knew you were just in for a hell of a day. And it was just that the unfairness of it all. And then at the end, we were downgraded from an outstanding to a good. Now, most people will be really happy with a good, but you can tell from me and my striving for excellence thing, I was like, what do you mean? And it was totally unjust, the reason that they'd done it. And there was no challenging them, no speaking to them, no complaints process worth its salt. I think the complaints process that they have, there's like nobody gets anything changed. So
what was the reason
that just broke me?
What was the reason they provided? Was it the staffing ratios or what?
Oh, they don't give you any reasons. You can challenge them, but you don't get, because I was like, why are you here? Why are you doing a full inspection? Why are you not doing what you're meant to do when you get a complaint, which is go and see if it's valid, go and walk the floor, fully appreciate it's important, you check it out, but it wasn't true. So you should have walked in, seen it wasn't true, and walked back out again. That's what they have the power to do, and rightly so, but that's not what they chose to do. And then within, I've just remembered the rest of it, actually. So while they were there that day, they did an inspection at another setting the next day and one the next week as well. Now, the others retained their outstandings and it was all good. But what I'm saying is, can you imagine that level of pressure? When they turned up at the third one the next week, I honestly thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was beyond apoplectic, but I was also so stressed.
So these inspections, because I think this would be really interesting for people. Well, I'm really interested in it. But why? So when did you get that notice of them coming in at 7:30 then?
We didn't. We on that particular inspection, because it was what they call a complaint-led inspection, because they'd had that complaint that wasn't valid and wasn't upheld. They just turn up. Can you imagine pulling into pulling into your setting? The poor manager, because I wasn't there at 7:30. The manager opened up the building at 7:30, and that she was already stood at the door. And I almost think that as well is just so unfriendly. Give a half an hour.
I was going to say it's sort of like the bailiffs or turning up for illegal migrants type, sort of breaking down the door type thing. God, blimey.
It was really, really aggressive. And the poor manager rang me and went, "Jennie Ofsted are here." I was like, "I'm on my way," because I always went and supported and gave moral support. And, it is what it is. But that ultimately did drive me out of the sector. I just felt that it was too much pressure, too much. It broke me. It's as simple as that. But at least I had the sense to realise I was broken and I did something about it. And it has been the best thing I've ever done. And I was 48 when I sold the business and I thought I was going to retire. And apparently everybody that knew me was like, "Yeah, whatever, you're not going to retire." And a year into my retirement, I came up with a new idea. And like a fool, I've gone again.
Exactly. Well, this is what I wanted to come on to. But it is, listening to your story and so on, it's just such a shame for somebody with two little ones and a third one on the way to kind of hear that and hear that you leave the sector because of it is really heartbreaking. And that's part of the reason why we've got some of the challenges in childcare that we do. So,
I mean, just today it's in the news that there are loads of childminders leaving the sector as well for similar reasons. So it is a problem. And I think Ofsted at the moment are very much in the spotlight and rightly so. I think things need to change. Of course, we need to inspect settings and of course we need to inspect schools, but I think something radically needs to change and I really hope it does.
As you say, you've gone on to do it all again. So you've launched My First 5 Years. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so My First 5 Years is sort of taking the knowledge of 20 years in the childcare sector. And what we're trying to do, well, not trying to do, what we are doing is giving parents access to expert information in a really timely manner as and when they need it to really help them help their children develop in the very best way. There's a massive recognition now that the first 5 years of a child's life are the kind of foundation for everything to follow. And we're really helping parents understand, but not in a judgy way, in a very realistic way, because myself and my co-founder, Alistair, he has 3 children, I have 3 children. So between us, we've done it and we know that parenting is challenging, and what we're not trying to do is add anxiety. We're actually trying to take anxiety away by giving parents the knowledge we have as childcare professionals to really help them understand how to help their child develop and give them the very best start in life. And actually it's really, really simple. When you break it down, it is very simple, little things that you can do on a daily basis with things that are in your cupboards and things that are outside in nature that you can do with your youngest children to help them flourish. And some of the common misperceptions that parents have about how to do that can often be quite damaging. We're trying to undo those myths and change the sort of generational, things that can repeat in families by giving parents this sort of expert in the pocket with the app. So it's going really, really well.
So what are some of the good hints and tips and tricks? And what are some of the bad ones as well? But let's focus on the good first. But give us some examples of it.
Well, it's things like talking to your children right from the get-go, right from being a baby and sort of doing a whole sort of serve and return thing. So very young babies can babble back. And it's sort of having a conversation with a babbling baby is really, really good for their language development, for example. So we're just giving those hints and tips to parents. Little things like allowing slightly older children to get bored.
Mm.
because then they'll use their own imagination about how to fill some of the boredom, not feeling that responsibility constantly to keep your children busy, because actually that little bit of boredom is good for their creativity. Things like giving children a blank sheet of paper when they're that little bit older and they start mark making, so that they can use their creativity to think about how a drawing might look, rather than, giving them something to colour in or something to follow around. There's loads of stuff on like Pinterest that you see parents like literally getting their children to, make a bunny rabbit at Easter and making sure that everything's put in the right place. And they think it's creative, but actually the children are just following instructions. They're not actually using the creative brain. Whereas if you give them a blank sheet of paper and you give them a load of pom-poms and glue and glitter and paints and things and say, what should we do today? They're going to use their imagination. And these are all really, really important skills for the future. Parents often try to get children to write too soon. So rather than focusing on writing, focus on getting their hands strong, so that when they're ready eventually to hold that pencil, it's comfortable for them, and letting them be creative about, the things that they draw. When their drawings get intricate, so when they may be putting eyelashes on the face as opposed to just drawing a big circle, maybe that's the time to start introducing, shall we write your name? Because they're more likely to be successful. If they can do little eyelashes, they can probably do a L or an I or whatever, the letter is that they're trying to draw. And if they get success, they're more likely to be motivated to want to do it. Whereas if you introduce it too soon and it's too hard and it's not enjoyable, you're actually doing the reverse of what you're trying to do. So it's things like this that we're trying to share with parents. And they're all penny drop moments, aren't they? You're listening to any of what I've just said there and go, yeah, that makes sense. Totally. It's not as if it's rocket science, and it's not as if it's difficult to understand, but it's getting those messages out there. And we know how children best develop, and it is through play, and really encouraging parents to value play and see play as learning, as opposed to play being the thing you do in between learning. These are some of the key messages that we're trying to help parents with.
But it's also separating yourself out from it, because it's often very easy to give advice to other parents and think how you would do it, etc. But when it's your own, you kind of sometimes can't see the wood for the trees, particularly if you haven't slept and all those side of things as well. So yeah, but I totally agree. What are some of the what are some of perhaps the common mistakes? I mean, you talked there about the handwriting, which is really interesting. What other ones are there kind of out there?
Well, I think what we are trying to do with the app is really help parents stop comparing. So I think one of the biggest things that parents do is compare their child to the kiddie next door, or to their brother or the sister or the cousin or whatever. And we call it comparanoia, this constant, paranoia about how is your child comparing to other children. And I think often parenting apps fuel this in a negative way, and it's something that we're changing, because they do this thing called milestones. So most apps will say your 12-week-old baby should be doing this, this, and this. Your 6-month-old child should be doing this, this, and this. We don't do that in our app at all. What we do when you log on is we ask you some questions so that we figure out where your child is uniquely in their learning journey. So that becomes their starting point. And then we let parents know what's likely to be next, so that they can start to look for it, start to spot the little things that they would probably never even know to look for, and really start to see the learning and celebrate the learning. And it becomes much more celebratory, and that feeling of momentum that, oh, they can do this week, oh, they can do that now, they can do this now. And tuning into their child as opposed to all the other children, and giving that feeling of momentum and celebratory success is a much better way to go about helping your child develop. So I think the biggest mistake parents make is compare their child directly with other children, instead of recognizing they are a unique person and they're going to learn in their own time and their own pace.
How did you meet your co-founder, Alistair?
Me and Alistair go back a long way, I think over a decade. So about halfway through my Kidsaloud journey, I, again, was striving for excellence. And one of the things that I wanted to do was improve what's called our pedagogy, which is our approach to learning for children. So I sort of lifted my head up for a bit and looking out widely to see who I really felt got it and who would be an inspiration to the team to really help raise their game about their understanding of children's development. And I came across Alistair, and I didn't realise at the time, but he was really local. He lived sort of 10 minutes away from the head office. Persuaded him to come and meet me, and we just got on like a house on fire. We laughed and laughed and laughed about, he just had a way of sort of basically saying, that's a bit crappy, that, Jenny, but without saying it like that. He found a way to get me to look at stuff and laugh about it, but also change it. So I just found him a really inspirational character, that he really knew his stuff, had the academic rigor for what he was telling us, but did it in a way where you went on the journey with him rather than felt judged. And I asked him to formally get involved in helping the training and development of the team at Kidsaloud, and he did. And we just really hit it off. And when I had the idea for my first 5 years, I knew that the only person I wanted to do that with was Alistair. And I picked up the phone. And because Alistair is so good at what he does, he was typically booked up sort of 18 months to 2 years in advance. But because COVID had hit and most of what he used to do was face-to-face and in person, his diary was clear. And we often say that if I'd have picked up the phone at any other time, he'd have said, that sounds really interesting, Jenny, but I can't for 2 years. And he was able to say, let's do it. And he had to think about it. He chatted to his wife, Fee, and between them, they were like, yeah, this sounds like a journey we could go on. And, he has been the co-founder from day one, and he brings, I've got the business experience, I've got the passion, the vision, the values, all that good stuff, but he has the academic rigor that everything that we say in the app is absolutely bob on, and that parents can trust it.
Bob on. Great phrase.
Bob on.
And what's the business model for it?
It's basically a subscription model. So we sell direct to consumers. A consumer downloads it from the App Store or the Play Store, and they pay a monthly subscription, and they get to try it first. So there's like a 14-day free trial, and they get to use the whole thing and see whether they get value from it. And if they do, they go ahead and they pay a monthly subscription. And the thing is, parents spend such a lot of money on toys that they don't need and, things that they think are going to help their child develop, and they really don't need it. And at the moment, the subscription price for our app is $4.99. For $4.99 a month, we can tell you how to do it without all that stuff. And you'll save yourself a fortune. You'll become more knowledgeable. You'll really get to tune into your child. And what we love to hear from our customers is it reduces anxiety. It reduces that parental anxiety because they know that they're doing the right stuff for the children.
And it really is a great app. And how have you found it raising money as a second-time entrepreneur?
Second time around is easier because you've got a track record. So I guess, both businesses are the original business was based in Manchester. This one is as well. Manchester will often say it's a village. It really is. Even though it's a big city, we all kind of know each other. So I've been around for 20 years, know many, many other founders, some of whom have gone on to exit businesses and do really well for themselves. So there was a network of people I could approach to get involved and back the business. And I also put money into the business myself. So I think as a second time around founder, it was easier, but it isn't easy. We're doing a crowdfunding at the moment, and there's just always, the need for the next lot of cash. Yeah. When you're doing this sort of business, the last business was completely different. You sort of got one lot of funding and you opened a business and you filled it and it started to be profitable, and then you'd open another and another, and slowly but surely I grew that organically. Whereas this is about spending a lot of money up front to develop something exceptional, and then a lot of money on marketing so that consumers get to hear about it. And it's just a very, very expensive startup phase, but once it gets going and once it tips into the right number of users, which we're not there yet, we're on the journey to get there.
But you've got
every opportunity.
You've got a decent chunk though, right? It's almost 6,000 downloads now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we launched the subscription model this year, and we have over 1,000 paying customers now. But we want to have millions of customers internationally. We want to change the world with this app. And actually, we are also, I'm quite farther down the line. I won't name the charity, but we have a large charity that focuses on children that we want to work with. So people that can't afford the app can still get access to the app. It's really, really important to us that money isn't a barrier. Yes, we need to charge for the app and it needs to be successful in its own right, but we want to make sure there is a way that those that can't afford the app can still get access to the app. So we're going to hopefully be partnering with a charity that will do that. And I'm thrilled about that because I want everybody to have it.
That sounds exciting. But also there's some other lines in the business model as well, isn't there, in terms of you're going to be releasing toys and so forth?
Yeah, well, the biggest one that we're excited about, because I think it launches in October from memory, is books. So we actually have signed a 15-book deal over 5 years. And we've written 3 of them now, and the first one launches in October. And we've also got a podcast. I think that's how we came across each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are lots
called My First 5 Years for people that want to go check it out.
Yeah, please do. Thank you for saying that, Jimmy. So yeah, and also some toys, because yes, we're not saying toys are bad, but what our toys do are they're what we call open-ended toys. So the toys where children use their imagination, and they're really high quality as well, so that they last and last. And what we hope is that, you know, when kids have children of their own, they might go to the attic and go, oh, I remember these, and they're still in good working order, and their children can play with them. So yeah, we're really passionate about the whole ecosystem and giving parents access to information wherever they can find it. And we've got loads of free resources on all our social media platforms as well. So you don't have to buy the app, but the app is the sort of pinnacle of the experience. I think what I'd say, Manchester, is there's a massive ecosystem of female founders, and we are all chatting. We're on a big WhatsApp group, actually. We all support each other and chat to each other and pose our questions. You know, who do you talk to about this? What do you do about this? I think it's really interesting that as female founders, we're really supportive and have each other's backs. And I was chatting to a male founder a couple of months ago who was saying how lonely he finds it being at the top of the business. And this loneliness is definitely a thing, and it's something we all experience. But I was telling him about this WhatsApp group of female founders and how I just find it an amazing space to go and get, you know, help and support. I said, do guys not do this? And he's like, no. He said, I think we're too keen to show that everything's fine and there are no problems. And I don't think that forum would work so well. I have no idea. I'm not a guy. I can't comment. But he said that to me. He felt that we're very vulnerable on that group, that WhatsApp group of female founders. We are really vulnerable. And he just doesn't think that could work quite so well for men. Who knows? I'm not one.
I think there's probably some truth in that. And as a final question, if you could go back and tell yourself one thing at the start of your entrepreneurial journey, so getting off that train in London when you'd come up with a business idea, the brand and so on, what would it be?
Yeah. A couple of things. Don't get perfection paralysis. You know, just get on with stuff and do it. And I think that's one of the things I'm pretty good at. I don't have perfection paralysis. If anything, I jump in with both feet and sort of figure it out as I'm going along. But I think what I'd have said to myself is stop spending money, Jenny, because I was earning a really good salary when I started. Well, I wasn't once I started Kidsaloud. I'd given up that really good salary, but I didn't change my lifestyle. I didn't change my spending habits, and I got myself in a right financial pickle on credit cards, keeping it up. And I definitely would have said to myself, cut your cloth. You know, you're not earning any money right now. It took me 18 months before I drew a salary from Kidsaloud. That was painful. And I would have said to myself, cut your cloth, wind your neck back in on your spending, and be a bit more sensible personally. Because actually, when you get yourself in a bit of a personal mess with money, it does distract you from the business because you're kind of worried about it in the background. So that's definitely something I'd have said to myself, and I wish I'd listened to myself about.
And it's often the thing that entrepreneurs think about last, right? Which is weird because we're obviously quite focused on money the whole time, but it is that what you pay yourself and how you do it is often kind of the thing that's at the very bottom of the list, which is ridiculous on so many levels.
Yeah, it's always at the bottom of the list. I didn't draw a salary for 18 months. So when I did draw a salary, it was half the salary I was on. And I stayed on that lower salary for years. I'm not complaining because, I've done very well. And the business eventually, did help me with my own personal financial security. But I think entrepreneurs often, I call it have your ass out the window. You literally just, you don't look after yourself. You don't look after your financial well-being. You don't look after your mental well-being. You don't look after your body. It's all just a shambles, personally.
So
but eventually, as your business gets successful, that's what gives you the opportunity to put an infrastructure around you to help that. So, as soon as I could afford it, I got a housekeeper at home because, doing a full day like I was doing with kids and then going home to a messy house was, another tipping point for me. But as soon as I could afford it, that was something I invested in. As soon as the business could afford it, I got myself a PA in the business to help me keep myself organized and manage my diary and my admin. So eventually the business was able to put an infrastructure around me that let me focus a little bit more on myself and the work. But yeah, there's no doubt that most entrepreneurs that you meet have got many challenges going on. I think that's fair to say.
Jennie, thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. It's definitely worth checking out the app if you've got kids, My First 5 Years, and also the podcast. I've listened to a lot of parenting podcasts, and yours is probably the best, apart from my parenting hell obsession. But I think that it is brilliant. It's really practical. It's really useful. A lot of parenting podcasts tend to be a couple of people just sort of droning on, but you and Alistair have a really good chemistry, and it works really well in terms of practical tips. So I find it really great.
Kind of you to say, Jimmy. Thanks very much.